Afternoon, everyone. I'm Gabrielle Atchison, the convener of Talk2Talk, and we're talking now. We welcome one and all to this afternoon's presentation of A City on the Hill, Black, Indigenous, and People of Color Leadership in the Episcopal Church. Please allow me to share a few logistical norms that will govern our time together. Unless you are one of the panelists or otherwise instructed, we ask all attendees to please put your devices on mute. As our presentation unfolds, please add your questions and comments to the chat box. In that way, we will be sure to capture and respond to them by the end of the program. This event will be recorded and will be available later on UBE's YouTube page and website. As is our custom, we begin our time together with prayer. Let us pray. God of our hope, God of our dreams, God of our understanding. Humbled, we bow before you, giving you thanks for all of creation. We thank you for all that you give us. We praise your name for forgiving us of our sins before we ask for forgiveness. Only you can raise us from our brokenness and make us whole. Only you can give us the peace that we yearn for. Fill us with your spirit, be our light in the darkness, envelop us with your presence, set in our hearts to always praise you. Let us ever be mindful of your healing spirit. Let us live one with you. Hallelujah. Amen. Our panelist today is Julia Ayala Harris. At the 80th General Convention in 2022, Julia Ayala Harris was elected president of the House of Deputies, the presiding officer who works alongside the presiding bishop. President Ayala Harris is the first Latina and woman of color to hold the position. She is passionate about a multitude of issues such as immigration, race and ethnicity, LGBTQ+ inclusion, truth-telling, as well as justice initiatives. Please join me in welcoming President Harris. So my first question is to just ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thank you all for having me here. It's such an honor to be here and to be with you all on this Sunday, and anyone who's watching the recording of this later. The Union of Black Episcopalians has been in the forefront of, justice and racial justice in our church and beyond, and it's just such an honor to be at an event like this and with you all. So about myself, my name is Julia Ayala Harris. I'm the president of the House of Deputies. I grew up in Chicago as a Cubs fan, and I am at the intersection of two very large, wild families. One is and one is white and from the Midwest. And I was raised Catholic. Both sides of my family were Catholic. And as a teenager, I tried out being evangelical for a few years and then found the Episcopal Church. I also in college, I went to a Christian non-denominational college, and I have an undergraduate in nonprofit management, master's degree in public administration, and I'm attempting to continue my my doctoral studies in public administration as well. I don't know if you have any further questions on any of that, or that's just a quick overview.
We will. Okay.
Okay.
At this point, I want to welcome in spotlight. All right. Reverend Dr. Mauricio J. Wilson, who is going to take over for me. And Father Wilson serves as the Western Regional Director of the Union of Black Episcopalians and is director at St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Oakland, California. Since arriving in the Bay Area to serve at St. Paul's, he's also been active in ministries around Oakland and the Diocese of California. He is the Vice President of the Standing Committee, chairs of the Afro-Anglican Commission of the Diocese, and is an alternate deputy to General Convention. And he's going to take over for me asking the questions. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, everyone. My apologies for showing up late. I was doing some pastoral care after church. Just, the time difference is 1 o'clock here in the Pacific. So church work has just ended for us. President Ayala Harris, so good to see you again.
Good to see you again.
But it's wonderful to be in conversation with you today, particularly as we talk about the role of Black, Hispanic, and people of color in the Episcopal Church. So I guess, one of my first questions to you, which is a little bit off script, I guess, is how do you feel as a person of color now sitting in the chair with the gavel in your hand?
Oh dear. Well, I haven't sat in the chair with the gavel yet, but that will be pretty surreal, I think. It is, as a person of color, and I think I would have to start off by saying it is an honor to serve alongside presiding Bishop Michael Curry. And being the first time in our church's history where both presiding officers are people of color. He has been a tremendous mentor to me and an unbelievable teammate and colleague. I cannot even tell you. We have a very good relationship. So I feel like whenever I'm having a little bit of a hard time, he's always there to help pick me up. And so I feel like I can't answer the question without giving kudos to presiding Bishop Michael Curry first. But I would also say, I think you all know that there are times where it's really challenging. And there are times where people hear things, they read President Harris, for example, and maybe think that Ayala is my first name, and they have an idea of what I might look like when I walk in the room, and that's and I look different.
Yes.
I'm with a different perspective, and usually they have to look down. I'm a little short, so it's pretty funny. But I would say that at the same time, it's a tremendous honor and an unbelievable blessing, and I am humbled to be in this role. And I will definitely still ask for prayers, and especially as General Convention 81 happens, and I do end up sitting in that seat with that gavel, I will appreciate all the prayers in that moment when
have them, guaranteed.
When it hits me.
You will have them. You will have them. So again, one of the important things about understanding the history of the Episcopal Church is understanding how we developed our structures developed parallel to the governing structures of the civil society. But the main difference is that we're a church. We're a people of faith. So what do you think in your life and faith has prepared you for this position of leadership?
There are, I could point to things like the service that I've done in the church, or having served on executive council or been a chair of a joint standing committee of executive council. But I really think that while I do draw upon those experiences that prepared me for this level of service, I think that I draw upon a lot more than I had expected of my identity. So like I said, I come from these two large families, and I'm where they intersect with each other. So being a multicultural person in this space, being someone who came to the Episcopal Church and fell in love with the Episcopal Church, not having been a cradle Episcopalian, and I'm 42 now. My age ends up coming up a lot. So a bit of a younger Episcopalian. That I think that what ends up happening is I bring a lot of those perspectives into the work that I'm doing. And I tend to be very future oriented. So I talk a lot about the future church and what we know about, as you had started off, Reverend Dr. Wilson's talking about civil society. We know our society is becoming more multicultural and less church going. And I feel as though I can bring a lot of that perspective to the Episcopal Church, because we know the Episcopal Church needs to become more racially and ethnically attuned to itself and to the neighborhoods that surround our churches. And so we need to become more and more multicultural and multiracial. And we need to be thinking more and more about the future. So in some ways, when I can draw upon, some of the, like I said, the volunteer work that I've done, and that's more of like the bread and butter. But when I think about, well, where are we going as a church? I think that in those moments, I draw more upon my identity, being a multicultural, multiracial person that's more future oriented.
But I guess you're kind of leaning into another question, which is, as you're talking about your own background for our church, how you talked about bringing, the church needs to change and bring more people of color into it. How about the importance of more leadership of color in the Episcopal Church?
Oh yeah, there is nothing. I'm just getting so excited. So I'm just jumping into every question. So I just
go for it.
Stop and think. But I'm getting really energized. There is, I think, no replacement for embodied representation. And I think you all on this call on UBE understand this more than anyone else in the church, that when we walk into a room, that we go to an Episcopal vestry meeting, we go to an Episcopal diocesan council meeting, general convention, diocesan convention, that embodiment of who we are in our own persons changes the room. So not only are we bringing our perspective and our lived experience into that room, but just by being there, we're changing the room. And that is in particular important when it comes to leadership in the church. So I can say over the past, this is my third, I guess, triennium. It's my 8th year on executive council, which is like the board of directors for the Episcopal Church. And so they're called terms, so it's my 3rd term. But my 2nd and 3rd terms here, we have half of our board of directors, the executive council of the Episcopal Church, are people of color. And that changes how we look at governing. It changes the types of programs that we do. It changes the values and the priorities of the church-wide structure by having people of color in leadership. And that, you can't replace that by, you have to have those people in the room. They have to live and bring their lived experiences, that embodied representation with them. It's wonderful to have allies and co-conspirators, but when you have someone who stands up and says, I am the child of sharecroppers, and so here is my experience, and here's where I want to see our church going. And for me, I am a child. My father came to the United States without proper documentation, so he's an illegal immigrant. And so that changes how I see the way that we do Latino and Hispanic ministry, or the way that we think about human rights. And you can't replace that. And so it is so critical, and you all know this better than anyone, that we have people and people of color who can bring those perspectives into leadership and be a part of policy making and policy change and priorities. So I could talk about that all day. I get so excited. So thank you, Reverend Dr. Wilson, for that question. And you're muted, unfortunately.
The host had to allow me to unmute myself. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. As a saying says, at a banquet, if you're not around the table, you'll end up on the table. Yeah. So I do agree with you that representation has to do with being present and being able to be part of the conversation. So one of the topics that exists now, in so much of our society is around the acronym DEIJ. And, some places add more letters to the acronym, or the acronym is different letters, but is the issue of diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, right? So we have been talking forever in the Episcopal Church about racial reconciliation. And now we're talking about the topic of DEIJ. Where do you think that work is? What state do you see it in the church, and what more do we need to do in that?
Yeah, I think that we've made, thanks to UBE, that's been the steadfast, on the front lines every year at every meeting, at every general convention, ensuring that we talk about racial equity and justice in the church. I think that over the past 7 years, in particular with Michael Curry's leadership, he's been able to call people in to having conversations about racial reconciliation. And I think we've made some pretty big strides. Like I said, we now have a lot more people of color in leadership than we ever have before, in particular in some of the most influential rooms of power in the church and in roles of power in the church. And we also have, through the Becoming Beloved Community initiatives, we now have a common language that we use when we talk about racial reconciliation across the church, which I think is helpful. I know that there are thousands of sacred circle groups among white folks that are meeting and talking together and, doing Bible study to talk about racial reconciliation. In my diocese in Oklahoma, we have several dozen of these sacred circle groups. So while that is the case, and we've been able to get quite far, and now we have a common language, I think that we all know, we're not near there yet. We still, when it comes to DEIJ, I think, we're still pretty far from justice. I think we can now sort of begin to define what justice might look like, but we're still in a place, and I think you all know better than anyone, where we struggle church-wide with truly understanding how much white supremacy has embedded in our systems and structures as a church. And especially on the East Coast, in our buildings and in our endowments, and the way that we are church. I mean, we cannot separate the Episcopal Church from white supremacy, but what we can, and I hope that what we're starting to do, is to begin to tell the truth about the way that white supremacy has gone about in the upbuilding of the Episcopal Church. And to do so in such a way where, as we name it, we can also embrace some of the successes that we've had along the way, and begin to define what justice will eventually look like for us. So I have some hope that some of the ways that we can go about doing that from a governance perspective, as president, I'm a big governance geek. So from a governance perspective, that would be things like right now the constituting group is working on creating what will become the Episcopal Church, the Episcopal Coalition for Racial Equity and Justice. And they can help, once that coalition is defined, they can help us figure out how we go about defining justice and working toward it, because we do have a very long way to go. But that doesn't mean we don't have things to celebrate now. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So let me take you back to something you mentioned. Okay. You talked about the structures of racism. Mm-hmm. And so one of the conversations I've been having with some conversation partners over the last 2 months is around one of the examples is the ordination process. Mm-hmm. And one of the conclusions we have come to is a realization that, first and foremost, the ordination process was built for white young men to become priests.
Absolutely.
What we have done over the years is that we have asked non-white young men to behave like white young men to make it through the process.
Mhm.
We have not changed the process to make it different.
Mhm.
What is your thought about that? That's just one example. That's just one
I
example.
know, it's a good one.
Yeah.
That is absolutely one of the ways where, so I have these 3 themes that I discerned as a part of what I hope to live out as president of the House of Deputies. And they are accessibility, inclusivity, and safety in our governance structures. The ordination process doesn't fit in the governance structure piece, but since you asked the question, I will
Yeah. Go
step
for
my
it. Go
role.
for it. Go for it. Go for it.
And I'll just riff off some of that. But that has to do with accessibility and inclusion. And accessibility being that, one, the ordination process is specifically designed to keep people out. I mean, it's designed to be a barrier that's only for white men at a certain time in a certain place, right? And then an inclusion. And so one, naming that and seeing it, which we know to be the case. We know it. Every commission on ministry has been told that this is the case, right? That the system's broken, it's antiquated. These are words that we use. But what we also know is that it's built on a heteronormative white male patriarchal system. And then after naming it, we ought to work towards that inclusion piece, right? Where if we discover the system's broken, like any car that needs maintenance or needs to be repaired, we should maintain it and repair it. And somehow there's a disconnect between saying, yeah, it's antiquated. Maybe we're comfortable with how antiquated it is, or we think that it's going to be okay, that people try to change who they are or shed some of their cultural identity or their racial identity, become priests, or that they expatriate themselves in order to become a priest in the Episcopal Church. But the truth is that that's not okay. That's not what God calls us to do. And that's not the model that Jesus gave us. And so we do have to work and have folks do the hard work of how do we make those processes more inclusive. I know in the Latino community, one of the ways that we struggle is, and I'm a layperson, I discerned being a layperson in the church, but one of the ways that we struggle is that it is the community that brings up someone. And so it comes from the community, and they raise someone up as leader and then say, this is the person that we would like to see ordained. And yet the questions in the process at a commission on ministry might be very much, what is your personal discernment for this? And a personal discernment might look very humble in a white supremacist, too humble, and perhaps not actually having done the work to discern becoming a priest, because it looks different from a cultural lens, right? And I hope that that's making sense without me having to explain it too much, but I'm seeing a lot of nods. So I think I'm talking to people who understand what I'm saying, because it doesn't look like the person's done the individual work, but it's not an individual thing in so many non-dominant cultures. It's a communal discernment, not an individual discernment. Totally lost in our church, in many commissioned on ministries in many dioceses. And that's work we absolutely have to do. It's critical because, like I said, we know that the United States and the future church is not completely white dominant culture, that these white supremacist systems cannot continue being the way that we form leaders or ordain leaders. Because we also know that in 2045 or so, I have to look at the current statistics, the white folks will not be the dominant racial category in the United States. And so we're looking at the fact that people of color will be the dominant racial groupings, right? If we take all of them together, and the white folks will not be the numbers wise, they will not be the population of the United States. And so this isn't sustainable in the US. It's not sustainable in our churches. So we have to change, and it's the right thing to do. It's what we're called.
Yes. Can I disagree with you on something?
Oh, sure. Yes, please.
The system is not broken. It's doing exactly what it was meant to do.
Oh, this is true. Thank you.
So maybe we should change the system, right?
Yes, yes,
I'm
thank
agreeing,
you.
disagreeing and agreeing with you at the same time.
Yes, no,
Yes.
you're absolutely right. Yes, this is a very good point.
Yes. Perfect. Okay, so let's move on to, so one of the areas that we have been, I think the entire church have been struggling with, and the Union of Black Episcopalians as well, is with our work with young people, and particularly trying to encourage young vocation. So the question is, what advice would you give young people of color, Latinx women, in their discernment of leadership or ordination, not ordination in the Episcopal Church?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think one of the places, I want to tie it to what we were just talking about. And I'm going to start big and then go individual, but that is,
Go wherever you want to.
okay, I have this feeling I need to say something. And that is that young people are less and less trusting of institutions overall. And churches, as we already know, are absolutely a part of that. Young people are not trusting church institutions, and because they're being taught every day. The news tells us every day we can't trust the government, we can't trust our banks, we can't trust our leaders, and sometimes in the news we see we can't trust churches, right? And one of the things that if we all recall when we were young people or chat with young people that they value is authenticity. And I think that in order for us to inspire young people into leadership, we need to be authentic as leaders ourselves, but our churches need to be authentic. So having conversations like what we're having right now, where we're being honest about where we've been when it comes to racial reconciliation, DEIJ, right, and where we're going, I think will get younger people more excited to be a part of an institution because we're being authentic to who we are. And that's something they want to be a part of. I think that they're completely done with institutions that say one thing and do something else. And yet we all know that we've been in the church where we've been disappointed by the church. We know, sometimes our church is not as authentic as we want it to be, and yet we're still here. And so I know that there are going to be young people who have that calling from the Holy Spirit to discern leadership, ordained or lay. And one of the things that I would say is that we know the struggle will be difficult, getting through commission on ministry, going to seminary, whatever that might look like, because those seminaries changing and the way we're doing seminary is changing, but that we absolutely need them, right? That, and they're not, it's not like, oh, you need to do us a favor, or it's more, we need their voices in leadership in the church, as priests, as deacons, or even as lay people, that the God image inside of them and what they're passionate about and their perspectives that they bring are essential to where we need to go as a church. And I would just encourage them that to lean on each other, to seek mentors, and to keep at it because we need them. And we need to be investing in these young people. Gone are the days when we can take young folks and young adults for granted. Holy cow. There are some days where I feel like we have 26 young people in the church. And, I'm like, what are we going to do? And not all the time, right? And EYE is coming up this summer. It's going to be great. I'm excited just to get their energy and feel renewed myself personally. And I've been a youth minister twice in the Episcopal Church, so I take that really seriously. But I know in some ways and I think we all feel this way at times. I want to inspire and tell them, come on in. It's great. The water is wonderful, but I also know how difficult that struggle will be. And so if there are ways that we can help them and encourage them, while also being real about having to find friends and lean on each other and find mentors through the process. Because we all know it can be crushing some days. But at the same time, we need them.
So what do we tell the church about young vocation? Because
Oh,
you just spoke about what we tell the young people about following their vocation. What do we tell the church about young vocation?
you know what? I think as I look out the window at the Apple, there's an Apple headquarters. I realize some of you don't know. I'm in Texas traveling at a hotel, and there's an Apple headquarters literally just outside this hotel window, and I'm looking at it. And of course, Apple is, innovation, right? And this headquarters building looks so different than, I mean, like, I wish I could turn, but then you wouldn't be able to see it because the light would be streaming in. But I'm looking at a building that's very futuristic. And if you didn't know it was Apple, you would know it was some sort of computery innovative building. And so I can't help but look at it as I'm thinking about your question, Reverend Dr. Wilson, because I think what we need to be telling the church about young leadership and young discernment is that these young people are not the church of tomorrow. They're not tomorrow's leaders. They're the leaders right now. And we need to be listening to them because they're telling us how to build the building I see out this window, this Apple headquarters thing. And it looks very different. It doesn't look anything like this box of a hotel that I'm sitting in right now. It looks pretty innovative. And so we need to be changing how we do church now based on what they're telling us. And we can't be telling them, like we talked about a few minutes ago with the ordination process being for white men. We can't tell them, no, you have to conform to this process in order to be in leadership, because instead we as church need to be telling ourselves and showing them, no, you tell us how we should be doing this process, what works for you. Because then I think we'll end up with some glass. I don't even understand how the roof is sitting up on this thing. It just looks like magic.
Somebody figured it out.
Yeah, we'll end up with a church that looks like magic. It'll look different than what we've done before, but we have to be willing to let go of so much in order to allow them to show us the way forward, right? But again, that's part of what Jesus has told us, right? He had the children come to him. And so we should be doing the same as an institution. And now I'm challenging myself and how I can show that type of leadership.
Excellent. So we have a question in the chat, and it's from Gabrielle. It says, a study of the Episcopal Church found that as a whole, we are over 90% white, yet BIPOC people are increasingly entering leadership positions. How do we overcome the perception that our church is predominantly white or is white?
Oh, that is a really good question. I think one of the ways that we do that, one, is to highlight people of color who are in leadership positions. And that also inspires more people of color to feel comfortable coming forward and to put themselves forward for leadership positions. The other way I think that we could look at perception has to do with worship. And let me just say that I appreciate liturgy, and yet it terrifies me. So I'm not going to go down a liturgy route. I, again, will stay in my governance polity sort of pocket. But I think when we have shared worship and liturgical expressions that draw upon all the different cultures that we have in the Episcopal Church and the different countries that the Episcopal Church exists in as a part of our neo-colonial heritage, I think that will help us reframe and change some of how we perceive ourselves and others perceive our church as being white. So Lift Every Voice and Sing, I think, has done a tremendous job in doing that over decades. Because we can see Levas like in, I've seen it in Minnesota, right? Like all across the church. And I think that that's one of the ways that we can change that perception, in addition to highlighting leaders of color and the type of work that they're doing.
So here's another question for you. One of the things that I have noticed over the years in the Episcopal Church is that we have titles for things. Like we talk about Black ministries, Latino ministries, women's ministries. We don't talk about white ministries, right? That is considered the Episcopal Church. How do we change our language to be less separate? I guess is the because when you go to what is the name of the church in Philadelphia, St. Thomas, that's just an Episcopal church, right?
Right.
How do we change that sort of language in our church?
That's a really good question, and hard, because of course having Black ministries and Latino ministries is also a place where we can feel home, but at the same time, like you're saying, while having Black ministries, Latino ministries, Asian ministries seems to decenter on whiteness, it actually keeps whiteness as the norm. Like you just said, Reverend Dr. Wilson, right? The Episcopal Church is white. That's the norm. So we don't have white ministries. That's just, ministry, right? But it still centers on whiteness. And so, that's interesting, because that's going to be a real struggle, I think, going forward. How do we integrate and not silo? But at the same time, how do we also keep our places where we feel like our homes, right? That's our extended family. I don't know that I have a good answer for that one just yet. But I think that'll be the struggle, right? Do you have? How do you decenter the whiteness on that?
I wish I had a full correct answer to that question myself. I don't. I did work once with a priest who said, there are 3 clergy in this congregation. We each serve the entire community. There's not a Hispanic minister, there's not a English minister. We all just serve everybody in this community. That was refreshing, right? So maybe that's the way, little by little we'll change our language and just say we're all Episcopalians or we're all Christians. But that's an interesting place to think about as we move forward in the future. Yeah.
That's really good.
Yeah. Any other questions from the community? I'm not seeing any in the chat. What does it say? This may be along the same line as your question. Whenever I mention Union of Black Episcopalians, people push back as if we do not need affinity groups as BIPOC people. How would you address that? Both of you can answer.
Yeah.
I could just put on the spot too. Do you want to go first or you want me to go?
No, I think my answer is probably the same. Well, first, yes, we still need these affinity groups. And I'm shocked, although not shocked, right, that there's pushback on UBE, the Union of Black Episcopalians. And because we need folks to advocate, again, from an embodied lived experience, right? We can't just rely on, oh my gosh. I'm going to say things that get me in trouble. They're essential. Look at what UBE has done for so long in the church. And there's just and it's not over, right? That long arc of justice has not been seen yet. And like I said, we're still in some ways articulating what justice looks like for a lot of folks. But the lived experience of people, Episcopalians in Navajo land, and what they value and struggle and need to advocate for will be different, but aligned, right, with the Union of Black Episcopalians or the Latino Caucus. And that doesn't mean we don't hold each other when we go together, right? And I'm trying not to say, or maybe I just should, that to lift as we climb, right? That we do that together. Absolutely essential. That and anyone who thinks that we don't need these affinity groups anymore, we're actually seeing an increase in affinity groups. There's a new under 40 caucus that will be at the next general convention for young people under the age of 40, rather than less affinity groups. Because I think we've seen how successful the Union of Black Episcopalians has been.
I would dare say that the main reason we still need them is because of their not because of what they are fighting for, right? So when the Union of Black Episcopalian fights to dismantle structures of racism, it is not only racism that goes away, right? Once we are, as you say, the arc of justice, once you start building it, it is not only for Black people. Everybody comes along, right, in that journey. So when we talk about dismantling structures of racism, we also want to dismantle structures of homophobia, of all the words are going out of my brain right now. We're dismantling the structures of poverty that affect mostly people of color, but there are some Caucasian people who are poor as well, who would benefit from this struggle. So all of these, when we fight for justice, it is not one form of justice that we seek to take away. It is all the forms of injustice that exist in our society, because we're looking to build a better society for all of us, right? Not only for one. And we're trying to build an Episcopal Church that looks more like our society than only a portion of it, right? So I remember, growing up in Costa Rica, and I didn't know that the Episcopal Church was white until I came to the United States. In Costa Rica, it is the Black church. That's the church where the Black people went. And so all of a sudden when I came to the US, it's like, what do you mean it's not the Black people church? So think about, in Africa and in other places, the Anglican church is not a white church. So how do we help? I think those affinity groups, like recently, I can't remember where it was. I think it's in Rhode Island. The Liberian community is having a gathering.
I think this weekend.
It is this weekend, yes.
Yeah.
Gathered there. They're gathered because their experience of the Episcopal Church is like mine when I was in Costa Rica, right? So it's an affinity group that helps them recognize not only their roots, but also recognize that the church is bigger than just what they experience here, right? So I think all of those things are important when it comes to affinity groups. And again, my Hispanic heritage also tells me that the Episcopal Church can be a happy place where we sing hymns and clap our hands and use tambourines and guitars. You don't need a pipe organ like the one I'm sitting under for worship to happen, right? So again, it just gives you a place where you're able to experience the church differently and then bring that experience back into the larger Episcopal community as well. Yeah.
Great.
I think we have 2 questions that just popped up in here. It says, one thought about diversity is people of color have the opportunity to teach who we are as part of the entire Episcopal experience. The learning process is what makes us all one in Christ. The distinctions are important, but we must bring every learning opportunity to grow in love.
Perfect.
That was from James.
Thank you, James.
So I guess it is, again, James, I'm assuming that what you're saying is that people of color experience brings a fuller experience of what it means to be a Christian, whether it be Episcopal or whatever title you want to use for it.
2 thumbs up.
Yes.
I mean, it's like because we're all made in God's image, right? So to be a reflection of Christ, everyone brings their God-given image into our community. And then it's also like the Apostle Paul's letter, that we're all part of one body, so the hand cannot go without the foot. And it's just that what you put in the chat, James, is just a perfect summary of all of those things. Thank you.
So you have one more year. So when you have the gavel in your hand at the General Convention for the first time next year, it is also going to be a time when you're going to be confirming the next presiding bishop.
Consenting to.
Huh?
Consenting to.
Yeah. And you talked about how good it has been to have Bishop Curry as a working and ministering partner. How do you envision yourself what is your dream as you're moving towards that next stage I'm not saying who you want, but how are you preparing yourself for what is next to come when it comes to that PD election and process?
Yeah.
Since we just had an African American and a woman, and so what are how are you feeling about the future?
I keep that process in prayer, and I'm a strong believer in prayer. And I know that sounds kind of silly to say in a church group, but I still, sometimes it's good to hear it, and it's just true. So, I lift it up to God every day, and because it's in God's hands, in the House of Bishops. But I am encouraged to see how the House of Bishops has, I don't know if you follow some of what they, some of the little things that they put out either on Episcopal News Service or some of their Facebook posts, but they seem like they've really become let me back up. The House of Bishops, it has changed significantly since the last time we elected a presiding bishop.
Mm-hmm.
A lot more women of color, a lot more Black women in the House of Bishops, and huge amen about that. And thanks to UBE. I mean, honestly, that's a lot of work there. And it seems to be reflective in a lot of the things that they do and their theological statements and their social statements that they're coming out. So I'm encouraged that they're in a healthy place and they're about to elect a presiding bishop from a healthy place. And again, putting all that in God's hands. I think that the thing that I've learned in the 9 months or whatever it's been since I've been president, because that's the other thing, it's a quick turnaround. It's only 2 years. And so it's like almost unfair, but is that relationship between the president and the presiding bishop is so essential. And the presiding bishop has shown me how that can be such a good, healthy relationship, and that when it's a good, healthy relationship, it really can trickle out to a whole lot of things that sometimes people can see, sometimes people can't see, but it makes the organization healthier. And so one of the things that I feel that I can do is to welcome that new presiding bishop in love and work on a really healthy relationship with that person. And then I, as we get closer, I'll start making maybe some more jokes, like break them in, like I'll break in the new presiding bishop, or, show them the ropes or whatever, which sounds hilarious for me to say. But really, I think it's about, working on that relationship with that person, and I'll bring my authentic self, and hopefully that person, and I trust that they will also bring their whole authentic self, and we'll be able to have a really good, healthy relationship.
Excellent.
I'm excited and very, very nervous.
I guess that's a good tension. That's a good tension.
Yeah.
Yes. Community, do we have any other questions?
All right.
I don't see any.
No more questions? Okay. Well, thank you both so much for this discussion. It was great. And I want to thank all of past leadership who are here and any special guests that have arrived. We acknowledge and thank the past and present leadership of UBE for attending today. We celebrate you as faithful pioneers and supporters of this organization. You have made and are making UBE what it is today. And thank you again for your presence. Let's go forth and be the justice makers God calls us to be. Let us go in peace to love and serve the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Can I say something to our president before she leaves?
Yes.
President Ayala Harris, know that the Union of Black Episcopalians is here to support you in your ministry, the House of Deputies, and please make sure to call on any of us, particularly our president, the very Reverend Kim Coleman, but all the rest of us are here to make our church better. We want to make sure that anybody who comes into any of our doors knows that they're going to be loved, knows that they're going to be welcomed, and knows that whatever struggles they're in, we're going to fight with them and for them. So in any way we can help you and do that, please make sure to call upon us. That's what we're here for.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. And thank you for having me here and that encouraging note. That's I'm getting a little misty-eyed. So thank you. I really appreciate it. This has been very uplifting.
Good. Thank you both. It's a great conversation. All right. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, friends, beloved.